Introduction. The opponent in the room. Most of the obstacles in your life are not outside you. They are not the economy, or the competition, or the people who did not give you the opportunities you deserved, or the circumstances that were harder than they should have been. Those things are real, and they matter. But the obstacle that most reliably shows up in every attempt, in every area, at every level of success, the one that is there when no one else is you. Not you in the sense of a fixed deficiency. Not you in the sense of something irreparable or shameful. But you in the sense of a set of patterns, thinking patterns, behavioral patterns, relational patterns, that were built in response to earlier conditions and have continued operating long past the point where they are useful. Self-sabotage is not a character flaw. It is the operation of protection systems that have become misaligned, systems that once served you and now cost you, that feel like your personality but are actually learned responses to old situations. The good news about that framing is that learned responses can be unlearned. The patterns that are costing you can be identified, understood, and gradually replaced. This book is about the specific ways people get in their own way, the habits of thought and action that undermine what people are genuinely trying to build, and about what it looks like to stop doing those things, not once, but consistently enough to change the direction of travel. Chapter 1. What self-sabotage actually is. Self-sabotage is the gap between intention and action, specifically the gap produced not by external barriers but by internal ones. The procrastination that delays the project you said you wanted to complete. The conflict that derails the relationship you said you valued. The doubt that stops the attempt you said you were committed to making. The behavior that produces the outcome you said you did not want. It operates invisibly, which is what makes it difficult. The person in the grip of self-sabotage rarely identifies it as such in the moment. In the moment, the procrastination is justified by the need for more preparation. The conflict is justified by the legitimate wrong that was done. The doubt is disguised as realistic assessment. The experience from the inside is not, I am getting in my own way. It is, I have good reasons for what I am doing. The diagnostic for self-sabotage is pattern recognition over time. One instance of avoidance proves little. But a pattern, the same kind of thing stopping you in the same kind of way across different contexts, across years, begins to suggest that the common variable is not the circumstances but the person inside them. Chapter 2. The roots of getting in your own way. Self-sabotage has roots. It does not arise from nowhere. The patterns that undermine you now were developed in response to real experiences, usually early ones, usually involving the pain of failure, rejection, humiliation, or loss, and encoded as protective behaviors designed to prevent the recurrence of that pain. The child who failed in public and was mocked learns to avoid public performance. The teenager whose ambitions were dismissed learns to keep ambitions small and private. The young adult whose trust was betrayed learns to withhold full commitment from any relationship that might betray them again. Each of these is a rational adaptation to a real experience. Each of them becomes, in adulthood, a source of self-sabotage. Understanding the roots does not automatically dissolve the patterns, but it changes the relationship to them. The avoidance that felt like weakness or laziness becomes comprehensible as a protective response. The reluctance that felt like deficiency becomes understandable as a learned skill, one that was useful then and is less useful now. That reframing is not an excuse. It is a starting point for change. Chapter 3. The Sabotage of High Standards. One of the most socially acceptable forms of self-sabotage is perfectionism. Because high standards sound like a virtue, perfectionism often goes unrecognized as the sabotage mechanism it is. The person who never finishes anything because it is never quite good enough is not a person of high standards. They are a person whose standards have become a barrier to completion. Perfectionism functions as protection. If the work is never finished, it is never judged. If the attempt is never made, it never fails. The standards become a reason to hold back rather than a description of what the finished product should achieve. The perfectionist can always occupy the position of being about to produce something excellent, which is more comfortable than having produced something real that can be criticized. The alternative to perfectionism is not low standards. It is the recognition that the version that exists is always better than the perfect version that does not. The published book with its flaws produces impact that the perfect unfinished manuscript never can. The completed project that is 80% excellent creates opportunities that the theoretical 100% project forecloses. Done and imperfect beats ideal and absent every time. Chapter 4. The Sabotage of Negative Self-Talk. What you say to yourself, silently and repeatedly, shapes what you attempt. Not because of some law of attraction or mystical correspondence between thought and reality, but because the assessment you make of your likelihood of success determines how much effort and persistence you bring to any endeavor. And effort and persistence are among the most reliable predictors of outcome. Negative self-talk is not honesty. It is a selective and distorted account, typically emphasizing past failures, minimizing past successes, attributing failures to fixed traits and successes to luck or circumstance. It feels honest because it is confident, it speaks with the authority of certainty. But its certainty is emotional rather than evidential. It knows what it knows by force of repetition, not by accuracy of observation. The antidote is not positive thinking in the sense of replacing negative assessments with false ones. It is accurate thinking, the same rigor applied to self-assessment that you would apply to an assessment of someone you respect. Would you tell that person they were hopeless? That their past failures were definitive? That the evidence of their limitations was conclusive? Probably not. The standard you apply to yourself deserves to be at least as fair. Chapter 5. The Sabotage of Avoidance. Avoidance is the most straightforward form of self-sabotage, and the most self-perpetuating. The thing avoided is not encountered. Because it is not encountered, the fear of it is not tested. Because the fear is not tested, it grows rather than shrinks. The avoided thing becomes progressively larger in imagination, further from reach, more intimidating to confront. Meanwhile, the act of avoidance reinforces a story about what you cannot handle. Each time you avoid something, you vote for a version of yourself that cannot manage that thing. The vote is silent, but it counts. Over time, the avoided category becomes a category of things you believe you cannot do, a self-imposed limitation that began as a temporary protective strategy. The remedy for avoidance is graduated exposure, the deliberate, staged approach to the thing that has been avoided, starting at a level of exposure that is uncomfortable but manageable and gradually increasing. The goal is not to eliminate the discomfort. It is to demonstrate, through repeated experience, that the thing can be handled. That demonstration is the only thing that actually revises the belief that it cannot be. Chapter 6. The Sabotage of Comparing Down. There are two directions of comparison, and both can be sabotaging. Comparing upward, to those who are further ahead, produces the inadequacy that undermines motivation. Comparing downward, to those who are worse off, provides comfort that undermines urgency. Both serve as reasons not to try too hard, not to expect too much, not to push into the territory where real effort and real risk live. Comparing down is the subtler form. At least I am not as bad as that. At least my situation is better than theirs. At least I have managed more than some people do. These are true statements, and they are not useless. Genuine gratitude for what is good has real value. But they become sabotaging when they function as arguments against growth, as reasons why the current state is adequate enough not to require change. The more useful comparison is temporal rather than social. Am I ahead of where I was? Is this year more than last year? Is the current version of me more capable, more clear, more aligned with what I actually care about than the earlier version? That comparison does not diminish through the accidental quality of other people's lives. It is entirely within your control to make positive. Chapter 7. The Sabotage of Seeking Reassurance. Seeking reassurance is a normal human need. The problem arises when it becomes the primary strategy for managing uncertainty, when instead of developing the internal capacity to tolerate not knowing, the pattern is to seek repeated external confirmation that things are okay, you are okay, the choice is okay. Reassurance seeking sabotages in two ways. First, it prevents the development of the internal resources that genuine confidence requires. Confidence is not the absence of doubt, it is the capacity to function effectively despite doubt. That capacity is built through practice, through tolerating uncertainty, making decisions anyway, and discovering that the tolerance was survivable. Every reassurance sought instead of tolerated short circuits that developmental process. Second, reassurance seeking typically does not resolve the underlying anxiety. The reassurance is received, believed briefly, and then the doubt returns, often stronger, because the pattern of seeking has been reinforced. The reassurance cycle produces temporary relief and long-term dependence, rather than the durability that the person was trying to find. Chapter 8. The Sabotage of Staying Safe. The safety that most sabotages is not physical safety, it is psychological safety. The desire to stay in situations where the outcome is known, where failure is unlikely, where the exposure to judgment is limited. This desire is natural and strong, and it is also, over time, one of the most limiting forces in a person's life. Growth lives at the edge of the comfort zone, at the place where the outcome is uncertain, the skill is not yet developed, the exposure to failure is real. The person who stays consistently within their comfort zone gets very good at the things they already know how to do and makes essentially no progress on anything else. The comfort zone is not a safe place. It is a slowly shrinking one. The path out of excessive safety seeking is not the dramatic leap, the grand gesture that puts everything at risk in one move. It is the regular small extension, the thing that is slightly outside the current comfort, chosen deliberately, approached with the knowledge that the discomfort is the mechanism of growth rather than evidence that something is wrong. Each extension, completed, expands the zone. Over time, what was intimidating becomes ordinary. What was outside becomes inside. The zone grows. Chapter 9. The Sabotage of Not Finishing. Not finishing is one of the most common forms of self-sabotage and one of the most invisible. Starting is celebrated, the launch, the announcement, the declaration of commitment. Finishing is where the real work is, and where the real vulnerability lives. A finished thing can be evaluated. An ongoing project can always be in the promising stage. The not finishing pattern has its own logic. Once you are most of the way through something, you can see its flaws clearly, flaws that were invisible at the beginning, when only the potential was visible. The thing that seemed brilliant in concept has become, in execution, something less than ideal. At this point, the appeal of a new project, fresh, full of potential, not yet revealed as imperfect, is strong. The shift to the new project feels like wisdom, like the recognition of a better opportunity. It is usually avoidance. The antidote to not finishing is lowering the stakes of the finish. The finished thing does not need to be the best version, it needs to exist. A finished imperfect thing generates feedback, opportunities, and credibility that an ongoing perfect project never can. The pattern of finishing, once established, changes the relationship to new projects. You begin them knowing you will complete them, which changes how you handle the mid-project loss of faith. Chapter 10. Building a Different Relationship with Yourself. The underlying project beneath all the specific patterns is the development of a different relationship with yourself. Not more confidence in the sense of certainty that things will work out. Not more positivity in the sense of suppressing honest assessment. But a more equitable, more patient, more accurate relationship. One that acknowledges both the genuine capability and the genuine limitations, without treating either as defining. The enemy within is not a permanent inhabitant. It is a set of patterns that have held on longer than they needed to, and that can be worked with, not by fighting them with force, but by gradually building alternatives. Each time you choose completion over abandonment, exposure over avoidance, accurate assessment over reflexive self-criticism, you build the alternative. Not dramatically, not all at once, but reliably, over time. The person who has stopped being their own worst enemy is not a person without doubt or fear or the pull of avoidance. They are a person who has developed enough of a relationship with those experiences to work alongside them, rather than being governed by them. The obstacles are still there. The path through them has become more familiar. Conclusion. The ally you could be. Every resource you would offer a friend going through something difficult, the patience, the encouragement, the willingness to acknowledge both the difficulty and the capability, is available to be offered to yourself. The question is whether you are willing to offer it. The version of you that stops getting in your own way is not a different person. It is the same person, operating with a slightly more accurate map of what the obstacles actually are, where they come from, and what actually moves through them. Armed with that map, the territory looks different. Not easy. Different. You have already survived every difficult thing you have encountered. That is not a small thing. It is, in fact, the most relevant evidence about what you are capable of, more relevant than the stories about limitation, more reliable than the fear about what will happen if you try. The enemy in the room, it turns out, has been living off a story that the record does not fully support. Key takeaways. Self-sabotage is not a character flaw, it is a protection system that has become misaligned. Learned responses to old situations, continuing to operate in new ones. The diagnostic is pattern recognition, not one instance of avoidance, but the same type of obstacle appearing in the same type of way across years and contexts. Perfectionism is protection. If the work is never finished, it is never judged. Done and imperfect outperforms ideal and absent every time. Negative self-talk is not honesty, it is a selective, distorted account. Apply the same standard of fairness to yourself that you would apply to someone you respect. Avoidance is self-perpetuating. The thing avoided grows in imagination, the fear of it grows, and the story of what you cannot handle deepens. Graduated exposure is the remedy. Reassurance seeking prevents the development of genuine confidence. Confidence is built by tolerating uncertainty and discovering the tolerance was survivable. The comfort zone does not stay the same size. Without regular extension, it shrinks. Regular small extensions compound over time into substantial growth. Not finishing is often avoidance of the vulnerability of judgment. A finished imperfect thing generates what an ongoing perfect project never can. A note at the end. The patterns covered in this book are not lists to feel bad about. They are patterns to recognize, in yourself, specifically, not as a collective accusation, but as a personal inventory of what is actually costing you. Some of them will apply. Some will not. The ones that apply are worth sitting with, not in a spirit of self-condemnation, but in the quieter spirit of someone who has finally located the right problem and is ready to address it directly, rather than working around it indefinitely. You are not your patterns. You are the person who can observe the patterns, understand them, and choose differently, not always perfectly, not all at once, but with enough consistency, over enough time, to produce a different result. That is not a small thing. That is the whole thing.